us. We're on a Midwest tour today. Second interview of the day. We started you off in Kansas City and we're headed north to Atlanta, where it is very polleny, beautiful, but polleny, we're hearing. But we've got Jeremy Heilpern, who is the CEO and founder of an Atlanta-based advertising executive agency called Ammunition. They're a full-service independent agency established in 2017. He's known for building high-growth, full-funnel agencies that integrate creativity and data-driven technology. His early start as an advertising prodigy founded his first digital agency at the age of 14. That is pretty cool. He earned a Bachelor's of Fine Arts at the Art Institute of Atlanta before turning 19 and had a rapid ascent through several Atlanta-based agencies, becoming a C-suite executive and eventually a company president by age 28. At his final stop before founding Ammunition, he is credited in doubling the size of a 30-year-old traditional firm by transforming it into a digital-first powerhouse. Ammunition Agency, since its launch in 2017, has consistently ranked as one of Atlanta's fastest-growing private companies. In 2024, it was recognized as a top indie agency by Campaign magazine. Heilpern has led strategic work for a wide array of global brands, including Samsung, LG, Mitsubishi Electric, Panasonic, Georgia Pacific, and Westlake. He's even led agency teams for U.S. presidential campaigns. His recent wins in as early as 2026, he has led the agency to win brand strategy and creative account for American Tire Distribution, North America's leading tire distributor. Heilpern initially built Ammunition with a hyper focus on home and building product space, later expanding into the broader B2B and B2C sectors. The indie premise positions Ammunition as a firm that offers the scale and sophistication of a large holding company with the agility and conviction of an independent agency. He's a vocal proponent of using AI to optimize business processes and recently launched The Bolt, an initiative focused on powering media strategy and AI. No pun intended, with the bolt behind him in neon. Jeremy, thanks so much for coming on, man. Really appreciate you joining us and talking to us a little bit about your story and walking us through some of your thinking. So thanks for spending some time with us today.
Listen, man, I'm excited to be here. Anytime you give a agency principal a mic, they're bound to talk. So buckle up. Here we are.
Let's go. Well, obviously you're set up for it. This isn't your first rodeo. So
yeah, that's right.
Hey, man, I'm fascinated about the idea that you started your first agency at 14. And that's usually where I start anyways, is I like to start at the beginning and give people a little bit of a kind of a walk down memory lane, and more specifically, kind of help the younger viewers understand how they should position themselves if they want to try and get a job in the industry, or if they maybe want to break out like you and become an entrepreneur early. And especially as a daughter of a 12-year-old that just hit 11,000 followers on Instagram within a week, I'm excited to, I'm excited to share this interview with her. So why don't you take me back to the beginning?
Well, good luck with the 12-year-old who's getting famous on Instagram. I've got a 9-year-old daughter and a 6-year-old daughter, and they're already starting to talk about these things coming home from school. So I'm terrified. I'll have to follow up with you in a couple of years and get some advice.
Yeah, we'll talk about a whole nother slew of agency issues.
That's a different podcast for a different time. Yeah, man. Maybe calling it an agency at 14 is generous, but yeah, I mean, I think the point there is I've never made a dollar in my life that didn't come from advertising in some way, shape, or form. And so, yeah, I remember being 14 years old, sitting in my parents' basement with an old computer, and starting to teach myself how the internet worked and how to set up websites, and started kind of just learning by mimicking other things that I saw online, or trying to rebuild stuff that I had seen in the wild. And one thing led to another, and at some point I stood up an agency website, and I started pitching work through whatever like Upwork was called at the time. Like, this is almost 18 years ago now. Well, no, it's longer than that. Jesus. I won't do the math, actually, not live anyway, but long enough that I know the websites I was using at the time aren't around anymore. But yeah, and just started kind of pitching, making websites or logos or, menus for restaurants, that kind of thing. I was kind of simultaneously going through college at the Art Institute of Atlanta. I got a 4-year degree and a Bachelor's of Fine Arts in advertising with a minor in web development, and wasn't really sure kind of where I wanted to go with that necessarily. But that was kind of, if you remember, the timeline was like, this is about the time where all the traditional agencies were trying to figure out what this internet thing was, and art directors thought, it's the same thing as a brochure. sure, I can do it in InDesign, except just put a nav bar across the top, and that's how you make a website. And so I was kind of brought in, so to speak, at a time where agencies are trying to figure out how to bring the two together, how to bring, more importantly, digital into their more legacy traditional environments, and sell those services to clients. And clients at the time having, I don't want to say kind of beginner level questions, but I remember early, just explaining what SEO was, why does it matter, and how do you think about that? And so I think I was fortunate that I kind of arrived at a time where people didn't have answers to some of these questions, and I was somebody who was thinking a lot about that. So kind of back to the premise, I was very convinced I'd never go to work for anybody, but one thing led to another, and I started making stops at various digitally minded agencies here in Atlanta who were trying to figure out how to put all that together. Ended up landing at a more traditional agency that had been around for about 30 years. Next thing you know, I'd spent a decade there, kind of coming up through the ranks, and then ended up kind of paving the way to starting Ammunition.
I love that. So I want to ask you two questions about your career trajectory. Do you think college was helpful? Would you have done it, knowing that you had such entrepreneurial chops at 14? Would you have, if you had to go back and do it again, would you have gone to school? And my second question is, knowing that you now, in hindsight is, they say 50-50 hindsight or whatever. The fact that you have established yourself as an agency owner probably proves that you could have done it at any point, but was the 10 years of experience foundational? And do you think that set you up for success for launching your own shop?
Yeah, I mean, I think my question, my answer to those questions is going to maybe, kind of echo each other. So I think back to the question of going to school, I mean, I think there's certainly lots of ways to be successful or to pursue your passions or to get good at the things you want to do in your career. And so I don't know that there's a one size fits all. What I would say is, if the question is, would I do it again? The answer is yes.
Nice.
I think you never know where you're going to meet people. I think even just having some of the responsibility of things being due on time, being able to manage a schedule, like just some of those basics that carry with you into your career, into the workplace. I think, and being able to do that in an environment that is, the stakes are still high, right? But they're not as high. And so I think being able to learn that in that sort of environment, as well as really being able to kind of build your network, I think that's huge. I mean, I think, we were involved in a pitch about 18 months ago, and this guy just messaged me on LinkedIn, and he said, we went to school together. I don't know if you remember me, but this was like, like 2000, what was it, 2008? And I was like, a matter of fact, I barely remembered the guy, but I did remember him, right? And we had just been connected at LinkedIn ever since then. And he remembered me. And so, right or wrong, I had made an impression all that time ago. And then when he was in need of an agency, he had stayed connected to me all through both of our careers, where we went very different paths, mostly in the same city, ironically, but really just never crossed paths again. But when he needed an agency partner, he had been keeping track of what I was doing, what Ammunition was doing, and called me up and brought us into that process. And so I think, the point there being, I think network is everything, especially in this business. I think it's probably true of all businesses. I can only speak to the one that I'm in directly. I think going to the question about would I have, spending 10 years somewhere, like, yes, again, I mean, so much of who I know, what I know, I either learned on somebody else's dime, right? Like, they paid me to learn those lessons, which I think is invaluable, right? Versus having to learn them on your own clock. But then so much of the words that come out of my mouth came from people that I met along the way. My network comes from people that I met along the way. We've got a guy here, he's our AI innovation lead, and I only know him because his wife worked for me like 12 years ago. And then she saw that we were looking for this opportunity to hire somebody to fill that role. And she said, hey, this is what he's made his whole career about. You guys need to meet each other. So I think you just never know where those connections are going to come from. And so I'm a big proponent of anything you can do, whether it's clubs, associations, school, anything, like just build your network.
I love that. I love that idea that school doesn't have to be looked at as a place where you just go and learn stuff. It's also network building. For me, like
100%.
Like joining Sigma Chi for me, and then getting access to like the global network was like very formative for my career. I definitely leverage that as much as I leverage the things that I learned. So I like to keep that perspective. Like, college isn't just like that. A lot of people are beating down on college these days and saying it's not worth it. But I think a lot of the things, you're investing in your network as much as you're investing in your credentials. So
100%. Yes.
Love it. So what does high growth full funnel mean to you?
Oh, give me better context relative to Ammunition specifically, or the work?
Yeah. Cause the AI scraped that as a way that you guys are positioning yourself, and maybe that's not true, but I wonder if that is that something that you like to associate with, or is that just a AI
Yeah. So
hallucination?
I think maybe AI summarized it in its own words. So I wanted to make sure that we're saying it the same way. I think
Sure.
Ammunition is very much positioned on being a growth driven organization. I think it's so much of who we've been since we started the firm. It's not growth for growth's sake, but I think the reality is if you're not growing, what are you doing, right? And I think
Yeah.
for so many of the brands that hire us, there tends to be a growth moment that's either happening or it's already happened and they're trying to figure out how to make sense of it, right? In the sense that we worked with a brand recently who acquired a competing brand in their category, and next thing you knew they had 35, 37 different brands that they were trying to manage all under one roof. And so that's certainly an organization that was buying market share, that saw themselves growing in the marketplace, did it through acquisition in that instance, but then they had this scope of all of these website properties and brands and ad campaigns and media programs that were out in the world, and how do we get all of this to come together in a meaningful way? And so being able to serve brands who are growth minded in that way, or we worked with a brand in the insurance space not too long ago who leadership got up at the start of the year and said, here's our growth goals, sales, we need you to hit it. And the sales team came and met with us and said, like, how are we going to do this? What needs to be true for us to be able to hit these growth goals that the organization has? And I think what we're very good at doing is kind of reverse engineering. Here's where you want to go. Here's where you're at today. Here's what it's going to take to actually get there, right? And then having the data and the reporting and the analytics to look at that and say, here's what's working, let's do more of that. Here's what's not working, let's do less of that. And here's how we can actually prove to you the success of the programs that we're running together. So, I'm a big proponent of that. That's why our tagline, we recently relaunched the whole agency position around this notion of growth no matter what. Like no matter what happens, and we all hear it, right? Like, we live in unprecedented times, or if we could just get to this next election, then this new reality will be true, or if this happens in this part of the world, and then like I'll never forget, I was meeting with a BD person 18 months ago, maybe 2 years ago, and I was getting all these excuses as to why this couldn't happen or that couldn't happen. We have to wait for this, and the phrase like we're just in unprecedented times, and like I'll never forget. Just like I had this. It wasn't an unkind reaction, but it was just like a raw reaction of like. The only thing that's true is, or the only thing that's certain is that things are uncertain. And so like, what are we going to do? We're going to look at these as excuses as to why we can't be successful. Or are we going to figure out what we do in the face of that uncertainty, right? Like we've still got a business to run. We still got growth goals in mind. We still have these ambitions. And so it's true of us as an agency in terms of how we hold ourselves accountable to what ultimately matters in the day to day. But most importantly, for the brands that we serve, we want to associate ourselves with high growth, ambitious organizations. And we want to do that because we can actually prove the outcomes.
Yeah. I always love the Warren Buffett quote, be fearful when people are greedy, be greedy when people are fearful.
100%.
It's almost like the unprecedented times are the times to really step on the gas and be the most aggressive. And, unprecedented times means leaders are looking at a lot of directions to flip the tables upside down, sometimes start from scratch, try things that they've never tried before, maybe switch their thinking from big agency to little agency, or holdco to indie, or consultancy to agency, or agency to consultancy. So yeah, I don't know. I look at uncertainty and uncertain times, and that's when I'm, I literally smell blood in the water. I guess that's how I'm wired.
No, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think as an organization, we have this very healthy understanding that, if we can make our clients look like rock stars, they're never going to let us go, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have shared incentives to make sure that not only is the work we do impactful, but we can actually prove the impact that we had, so that it doesn't become this subjective analysis of like, do I like the agency, or is the chemistry right in this moment? Like the reality is, if we're effective and we're doing a great job, we're not going anywhere.
Yeah. It's like, here's the numbers. The numbers don't lie.
Just is. You know what I mean?
I love it. I love that. I'm a huge fan of agency branding. Can you tell me about Ammunition? Where did it come from?
Well, my last name's Heilpern, so we had to start there, and that doesn't work. We didn't have any partner, so we couldn't do the abbreviation thing. And you start going down the list, and suddenly I'm left with, I got to come up with a word that means something, and I wish I had a poetic answer for what ammunition really stands for, at least when we started the agency. But the real story is, I did what any entrepreneur did, which is I went to work for somebody, and I always had that itch to maybe do my own thing, right? And I'd read books, or I would watch movies or whatever, and I'd have one of those late nights where I'm just feeling like, maybe now's the time, like maybe now, maybe we'll do it. And I'll never forget, it was maybe a year and a half before starting ammunition. I just sitting on the couch, it was 10 o'clock on like a Friday or whatever, and I just started like looking for like, what's a cool agency name, like what's something that stands out in a pitch, stack of pitch decks, what's something that's ownable, what's something we can kind of wrap some meaning around, what feels like we could excuse me, in the way like Google didn't mean anything until it did, right? Like what's our version of that, what's a good word? And then you have to go down the list of like, is it available, is the domain out there, can you use the trademark, are you competing with anybody, like, and kind of go down that whole list of, and then you're left with something, in my opinion, that was actually pretty great, in the sense that, ammunition, I think it's a word we get a lot of compliments that it stands out. We've been able to wrap, I think, a very interesting brand around it aesthetically, in terms of kind of how it comes to life and how we talk as an organization. So I think ammunition has it has a chip on the shoulder in its name, and I think that shows up in a lot of the messaging and the positioning work that we put around it. So does the word itself have any kind of inherent meaning of, no, probably not. Have we been able to wrap it and meaning something in terms of what ammunition means to the marketplace, the work that we do, and how it feels to work here? I think so.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, sometimes it's that simple, right? It's like finding the thing that works, and you can get the domain and build a brand around and all those things. Right. But then afterwards, you kind of like, it sits with you, right? And then it's like, now you try to tie the meaning. And I think a lot about ammunition is like the thing you never want to go into battle without enough of. I'm sitting here in San Diego in a community of special operators, and I have a lot of them as friends. And, the one thing that they'll tell you is, overpack, for these excursions. Yep. Don't underpack. You never want to be, in a firefight or in a situation and then you run out. And, there's also some context to the world, like right now, like a big topic whenever you pop on the news or look at global affairs is, are we running out of ammunition? It's like, right. I always thought, America doesn't have enough bombs to like bomb ourselves, around the world to kingdom come. But the reality is, these things are expensive. They take time to make. And, we've done ourselves no favors by giving all the manufacturing to places outside of our country when things like this come up, because now we're beholden to people outside of our own strategic values from time to time that comes around, needing to build ammunition. So I think it's a great name for a great time in history. So congratulations on having it be something that you guys were able to grow into and create some meaning around.
What's fun about it is we'll just be sitting in a room, and like nobody, we'll have a client, we'll be in a pitch, whatever, and then somebody like it starts using it in like the colloquial way we all use it, where it's like, do we have enough ammunition to do this thing, or like, we're trying to build the ammunition to tell the story in the right way, and suddenly it's like, well, no pun intended, but like, yes, it's very funny. It was never the intention behind the name, but just how often it shows up in that kind of context, right? Like, we need to go gather the information, bring this back to sales, and get them excited about this thing, and like, yeah, okay, yeah, it kind of works.
Pretty exciting. So tell me, I read off a little bit of your client list: Samsung, LG, Mitsubishi, Panasonic, GP, and Westlake. There's a phrase in our industry: 2 clients are a conflict, 3 is a specialty. You've spent a lot of time in electronics, consumer also, I would guess there was some B2B work kind of placed around in there. So tell me a little bit about your category expertise, or do you guys feel like you're a generalist to where you guys can really work on anything?
You touched on it in the open, and so I'll maybe kind of repeat some of those themes. When we started the agency, I remember joking with just kind of like my network and being like, the world doesn't need another agency, so what are we doing here, right? Like, how do we really make this? And not in a defeatist sort of way, but in like, let's get laser focused on the value we're going to provide and to whom. And I had a lot of inertia just in my career around brands in the home and building products categories, and I had good sense that if I could stand up a viable agency that had meaningful services to offer, that they would follow. I'd at least get some at bats, right? And so we made a deliberate effort to say, okay, we're going to position ammunition around being just built for brands in the home and building products categories. We lovingly joked, like, we weren't the agency hired for beer and bubblegum brands who are going to understand this category really well. And so probably for the first few years, if we started the agency in 2017, first 2.5, 3 years was exclusively serving brands in that category. But then, what ended up happening is this little thing called COVID came around, and as people got locked up in their homes, the behavior we saw is largely people, where they were buying bigger homes or getting that second home, or, building that outdoor kitchen, or, people were disproportionately investing in their homes because that's where we were spending so much time. And we were fortunate that so many of the brands we were serving at the time were the brands that were being sourced for these projects. They had distribution, they had manufacturing. To the point you raised a moment ago, they were all largely North American companies that had either manufacturing here in the States or in Canada. And so they were really able to kind of meet demand where it was at the time. And so as their businesses grew, so did ours. And so, looking back, COVID ended up being good for business in the sense that we just happened to be in the right place at the right time, serving the right brands. But I had buddies who had agencies in travel and tourism that just evaporated, and they didn't, they literally just went away in weeks. They folded, or they rolled up into something else, or we said as a team, we don't want that to be us. And as with any investment portfolio, right, you don't put all your eggs in one basket. And so we said, let's get out of just being exclusively focused on this category, but let's be true to what it is we think we've built here in terms of where we provide value. And so the way we started to articulate it at the time was brands that navigate these longer term selling environments, more complex paths to purchase. There tends to be a B2B side of the business as well as a B2C side. If you're using the home appliance example, right? Like if you've ever renovated
you're never
like
my refrigerator just broke for the second time, and we're like, it's 2 days in, and I'm like, have you talked to somebody? Are they coming to fix this? It's it's not something you go online. It's still something that you pick up a phone and you talk to somebody.
Largely, or a better example is like HVAC, right? Like we can build brand for an HVAC company, but if it's 90 degrees in Atlanta and your air conditioner goes out, you call the guy, he comes out and he goes, yeah, here's the brand you asked for, but here's the one on the truck. I can solve your problem today, or I can come back in a week. What are you going to do? So all that brand building, so it goes to zero, and I just want my problem solved. And so if you want to create awareness and demand on the homeowner side in this metaphor, you've also got to have education, awareness, and distribution, trade, whatever that happens to be on the B2B side, who are also bought in and willing to recommend and use those products, or the whole transaction goes to zero. So we started saying, what's in that DNA? What are other categories that function similarly, where you have to build demand on one side, but you also have to build affinity and educate on the other?
Yeah, so that's what they call a tier 3 model, right? Like within automotive, you've got the master brand, and you've got the regional dealer networks, and you've got the actually guys that are on the streets pushing cars.
100%, which ironically, then it became, we're pursuing brands in the automotive space and insurance and financial services and higher education. And as we've kind of evolved since then, the new positioning that's kind of out in the world as of last week is really focused on growth-minded brands and what we call layered B2B2C environments. So we're not just a B2B shop, we're not just a B2C shop, but we support brands that need to navigate both really well and have that ambition around growth and being able to be an agency that shows up in the day-to-day, truly full service. A lot of people say that they're full service, and then they go farm out the web development, or they go bring in a video production studio. We acquired an Emmy Award-winning video production studio in 2023 as an example, just to ensure we truly had that. We didn't just hire a kid and give him, Final Cut and said, now we do video production. Like we truly brought in a team of editors and directors and specialists at their craft. And, we do work for other agencies oftentimes, so we're actually brought in to kind of then support them on their production side, because the capability here is so deep. And the reason we've done that is, my bet is if the last 10, 15, 20 years was around kind of hyper specialization, right? Where, you need your digital agency, you need your social agency, you need your media agency. I think what AI and tech-driven creative is going to do over the next 10, 15, 20 years is going to be what I've started to call hyper generalization, where I want that one agency partner who understands my business, and whatever the execution is, they can go help deliver on that. And so that's really how we've built the agency and the way that we try to support our clients in the day-to-day.
I love that. Have you given much thought to salespeople as a media channel? And I mean that very specifically because, I don't think there's any other industry than the B2B2C in which the salesperson is such an important touch point with the brand. Yep. So, I'll tell you a little story. I guess it was 3 or 4 cars ago, my wife wanted to buy a Prius. She had the money in the bank account to buy the Prius cash. She went over to the Toyota dealership. The guy asked her where her husband was. She walked off she walked off the dealership. She never considered or bought a Prius ever again.
Yeah,
Well,
but not.
while being a prior Lexus owner. And then she bought and sold her last 4 cars on Carvana because she didn't want to ever deal with a salesperson like that again. That's how impactful it not just ruined the brand for her, but it ruined the entire category and the entire user experience, and turned her on to a direct to consumer model in high ticket items, which was something that we had never considered before that point. Salespeople are sending emails, they're answering phone calls, they're making phone calls, they're doing things that count as an impression. They are posting on LinkedIn. In my case, they're podcasting and reaching 19,000 people. How important is it for an agency like yours to be able to educate a brand on how important their salespeople are and how to make them a brand accelerator versus a brand deterrent, like in the case of my wife?
Well, your wife's example is a great example of where all doesn't matter how much brand building Toyota does, right? There's one person can now negatively impact that other person's entire perception of the brand, no matter what. And now, how many times have you told the story? How many people are going to hear it, even in this podcast? Now I'm going to tell that story, right? Like, so I think we always think about branding as the thing we control. The stuff we release and we say, here's our brand. Brand is how it feels to interact with the organization, right? And I think to your point, that's at every level, right? That's in the advertising that you see. That's the user experience when you come to the website. It's the content that gets put out on social, and above all else, it's the experience I have when I'm actually within your 4 walls, so to speak, right?
Yeah,
So I think
kind of the retail front line, essentially.
100%. 100%, whatever that looks like for whatever business you're in. If you're a restaurant and it's the wait staff, if you're a car dealership, it's the salesman who meets you out on the lot and makes you feel like, I want to hang out here, or I want to get out of here as fast as I can, right? And so I think where we've worked with brands around that whole kind of let's call it the customer journey, from that initial point of awareness through to a conversion, what we like to do is map what are all the touch points along the way, and they all have to be working cohesively together. I remember when we used to tell this same answer, same question, different words in different order, right, around like where the website fit in, 15, 20 years ago, right? And it was, well, the ad looks one way and you come to a website and it's a completely different experience that might be jarring to the user. Maybe I've ended up in the wrong place. Like, you want the things to feel like the family together. And I think your example of the salesperson being trained in the way the brand wants to be perceived, we want that experience to feel like when somebody comes to the lot and how they feel once they've left it. I think that's got to be part of that conversation. And in the same way that you would say, like, what's the art that goes on the walls, right? Like, what is the messaging that's in the building, right? Like, how are you briefing the salesperson to continue that brand message in the right way and give them the words to talk about it appropriately and train them on how you want it to feel to be sitting in that Toyota dealership?
Yeah, 100%. And where I almost think like the OEMs are in a really tough spot because they built these dealer networks, and then you've got these challenger brands like Tesla, who my wife has a Tesla now and she loves it, and they're direct to consumer, and they eat your lunch on deliverability and user experience. Once you're ready to buy, they make it so easy and so nice and so enjoyable. Whether it's them, whether it's Carvana, whether it's Whoop or whoever else we bought or sold a car from, I can't remember, but direct to consumer, I think, is going to continue to disrupt the high ticket. There's sometimes you just want a phone call. There's sometimes that you don't want to deal with a salesperson. You've got fintech. People like financial advisors sometimes. Sometimes they want to manage their own money and feel like the robots are doing it.
Sure.
There's so many interesting components about, like, do you want a human in the loop or do you not? And when do you want a human in the loop? Would love to hear about American Tire distribution. You want to walk us through the pitch, and congratulations.
Yeah, so it's American Tire Distributors. Not to correct you on your own show.
Oh, excuse me. Thank you.
But if Kirk's watching, Kirk would be very upset with me if I didn't make sure his brand name came out correctly. No, so ATD is a great brand. You touched on it. They're the North America's largest tire distributor. They also make a number of their own brands. They also own a franchise system where you can actually go and have your car maintained, tires changed, all that kind of stuff. it was part of a 18-month pitch, I want to say now. So
Holy
they
cow.
launched a national search for an agency. There were a lot of really good, maybe some of the usual suspects that you would think about who were brought into that mix. And, I think admittedly at the time, ammunition might have been, I don't want to say punching outside of our weight class, but maybe just like right at that cusp of, are we the right size and scale to support this organization? I'll never forget we were in one of the early kind of rounds of questioning with their procurement team that came up, and their question was, like, there's this other agency in the mix. They've got 3,000 people working there. You've got 40 plus, whatever the number was at the time. He said, give me a sense of why we can feel confident that you can actually handle our business. And I said, and every agency principal who's listening, or really any agency person, knows what I'm about to say is right, whether they ever admit it publicly or not. This probably relates to how big their organization is or isn't. Is I said, listen, like, whether they have 3,000 people working for them or they've got 20, it doesn't really matter. The reality is every single person pitching your business is going to do what I'm going to do, which is if we say we need 15, 20 people to support the scale of your business, they're going to come in with a pitch team. They're going to tell you the story that is the agency story. And then they're going to go do what I'm going to do, which is build the team. Some of it, yes, is going to be people already in the building, but no agency is sitting around. I don't care how big you are. You're not sitting around with 20 people twiddling their thumbs just waiting for an account to come through. No agency is doing that. Now, they might be able to reorient people. They might be able to take a best-in-class account lead that's been in the building and knows the agency really well and have them be the leader on your account. But the whole team that's going to support it, I would argue anybody who wins this business is going to have the staff to support it. I think that answer resonated well with them. At least I like to think so, given we eventually won that pitch. But it's been a fun one. They have big ambitious plans for the brand. It's been through some cycles recently. There's new leadership at the helm. They're very focused on kind of rethinking what that dealer experience feels like, what it feels like to transact with the brand, what it feels like across all the digital touch points, what loyalty feels like, all of those things. So really being able to not only kind of work at the brand level to say who and what is ATD and its product brands, what do they stand for, but what does it feel like to interact with that brand? What does it feel like to be a best-in-class tire distribution company that can actually build digital tools and platforms and things that actually help not only manage the business, but make it more delightful to actually interact with the business than it does for competitors? It's fun, but it goes back to, I think, our thesis of we want to work with big, bold, ambitious brands who want to do big, bold, ambitious work. And that doesn't always mean it's got to be the crazy stuff that's going to go to Cannes and win awards. So that stuff's obviously fun and has its place. Like, sometimes it's just, work that works. And that's something we can be proud of too.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that, analogy about the idea that nobody's got a 20-person team sitting around waiting for an account to fall on their lap.
It's true.
And like, I remember back in the day, when we were on the early side of the vendor world, calling into media agencies, like we would get the news that the business was up for review and everybody would be like, and then, and then the review would happen, and then a new agency would win the business, and then we'd be like, and then our client would call us and they'd be like, hey guys, bad news, we lost the pitch. Good news, I just got hired by the other holding company. I'm going right over there. You guys can come with me. They'll be like, all right, sweet.
That's right.
Like, I don't know if that happens as much today, but at least back in the day, the people would move, and literally the people would move with the business, and you would basically get the same people. They would just be at a different agency, which was absolutely bizarre and seemed like such a waste of time. But I guess at the end of the day, procurement's got to get their pound of flesh one way or the other. So that was the way for them to do it, is just put it up for review every 2 years, whether there's a problem or not, right?
Yeah, no, I think that's true. Your point, I don't think we see as much of that, like, whole teams transferring with business anymore. But yeah, I think the rest of that, yes. Sometimes procurement's just got to do its thing, and it makes sense. Why wouldn't they? It's their job to make sure that they're getting the best rates and the best deals, and that because agencies will do it if you let them, right? Like they'll start to run a little bit wild. And I think, I went on a rant about this recently, where it's like, if you want to take a look at what's happening at agencies and critique it, we're a byproduct of all the decisions we say yes to, right? Like, if you say yes to everything, if you have an agency that's got a bad culture, I'd say 9 times out of 10 they've probably got bad clients too. You know what I mean?
Wow.
Like, it becomes a reflection of what it feels like to work there. And clients, in the same way we have a disproportionate impact on their business, they have a disproportionate impact on what it feels like to work at our business. And so ensuring that it's a big part of how we think about our client relationships. And one of the things it's not always been the case, to be super clear, but one thing I'm very grateful of in our current incarnation of the agency is I can't think of one client on the roster that's just kind of that, there's kind of the drag on culture. Like it's all just
the
good
squeaky
people
wheel.
It's just good people who want good work. You know what I mean? And as long as we're doing that, if we're letting them down, of course, they're going to be a squeaky wheel, as they should be. But I think it always comes from a position of kindness, of empathy. It's just good people who want to do good work. And so I think we're fortunate that it feels really great to work at Ammunition, especially today, because we just have a great roster of clients who treat our team well.
Yeah, I love that. My last agency fired a client for the very first time. I'd never seen it done before. And I was like, wow, this feels like they actually care about us.
Are we allowed to do that?
More.
You can do that?
Yeah, they're like, wow. Well, like, I think it was one of those things like financial services is always late to a category, and we were influencer marketing.
Sure.
They have the regulations and the rules and like all the things that you would expect to a highly regulated industry coming to a modality, kind of late to the table. But yeah, just such a slog. And by the end of it, the client, we were all probably, who knows, maybe they wouldn't have hired us for a second scope anyways, but we decided to not throw our hat in the table.
Sometimes that's just the way it goes, right? I mean, I think agencies, obviously it's not easy to run an agency, and revenue is obviously king in this business. So you can empathize with why agency principals will put themselves in that hamster wheel of just constantly bringing in business, or sometimes saying yes to the wrong things, or saying yes longer than you should to things that are wrong internally. But I think it's such a necessary part of. I worked with a guy once, I'll put it this way, who said you don't have a position until it costs you something. And I think that's so true in terms of how you think about building brand and who we are to the marketplace, as well as who we are internally.
Yeah. And sometimes it's just terms too, right? Like I imagine that Dentsu gets tired of me bringing up this example, but the idea that Kara took, General Motors on for over 2 years with no fees, because they knew they would make it up on the back end with their sweetheart deals with, XYZ companies, as preferred products or opt-in products. And, to some degree, it's like, okay, well, procurement gets to win. The CMO knows that they're making money in other areas of the business to staff the account. This isn't magic. Like, why don't we just stop the charade and like show, how this all works? And,
right.
But it's like, like you said, sometimes it's not necessarily that like there's any bad blood between like the client's a dick or this or that. It's just like, we've got to create this strange hamster wheel to make it all work.
Yeah. Well, and I think kind of buried in that sentiment is different projects, different accounts play different roles on the roster, right? Mm-hmm. Some are going to be the pieces of business that are really efficient and maybe add to margins at the agency. Some may be the stuff that you're kind of breaking even on at best, but it's the stuff that might make you famous creatively. Like, I think also having just like a healthy understanding of what role is that account playing in the larger vision of what the agency is trying to accomplish is a necessary consideration as well.
Yeah, really smart. All right, let's get into Bolt. You've put it on the back of your podcast studio. Obviously, it's an important new component to the branding. There's AI purists, there are AI optimists, there are AI skeptics, there are AI doomsdayers. Seems like you're a pretty tech-forward thinking guy. So would love to get your kind of current state of the union on how you guys are implementing AI to supplement the workforce, maybe create efficiencies, but more important, how is AI transforming the business on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm old enough to remember when the internet was coming along and it was going to change everything, right? And it was going to disrupt the space. And then we started calling it Web 2.0, and that was a different version. And then responsive design was the thing that blew everybody's mind. But like, I was talking to a younger member of our creative team recently, and I said, do you know the phrase responsive design? And they looked at me like I had like a third eyeball, and they said, no, like I've never heard that before. And I was like, that's what we used to call being able to design for mobile screen sizes. And they were just like, their mind was blown that was ever even like a thing that we had to think about before, right? I remember when social came along and that was going to be so disruptive, and certainly these things are disruptive. But the weird thing about advertising agencies is I think we tend to kind of I don't know the right way to say it, but we tend to constantly always be on the lookout for our own demise, right? We're always like wringing our hands, like, "Oop, this thing's gonna kill us." Like my favorite example on the AI side of that is Sam Altman he like gave like a TED talk or something. I forget where it was, but he gave a talk where it's like how essentially he thought AI was coming for advertising, was gonna be able to like do all of our jobs. And then 2 weeks later, it was announced that he went to Madison Avenue to hire an agency to launch his big brand campaign. And it's like, wait, which is it? Right. And so I think the way that we've started talking about a lot internally is, first and foremost, there is no mandate from leadership at Ammunition to say we want to do more with less, or AI is here to automate roles away. What we do have a healthy understanding of is it might change roles, right? In the same way, the candlestick industry didn't do too well after the light bulb was invented, right? Certain things just change, and that's okay. And so we've tried to create a comfort level that leadership is embracing this for the right reasons. We're onboarding these tools to allow us to do things we couldn't do otherwise. We want to enable our people to do, when it used to be like budget was the issue or time was the issue, or whatever. My argument to staff is, let's use technology or AI to augment those things. Maybe they can be what bridges the gap to where, time and budget used to be things that got in our way before, but maybe AI can help us overcome those, or can start creating some efficiencies that allow us to bring those big, audacious, creative ideas to life that maybe we wouldn't have if we weren't using those tools. And so we really see it as tools to augment our people, to help our people, to support our people. In the same way, Microsoft Word or the typewriter didn't make you an award-winning author, right? Like, you still got to understand the subject matter. You still got to have skill. We talk a lot about it a lot, right? Like, AI doesn't have judgment. It doesn't have taste. It doesn't know heartbreak. Like, it can't feel those things. And so you still need a human who can bring in the discernment side of evaluating an idea, or whether this creative is going to work, or is the emotion here in the right way. But anybody who's used these tools also, especially like an LLM, if you talk to it about literally anything about, at some point you're going to find where it's wrong. And if you're putting your brain in a jar and you are using it to try to make yourself look slick and smart on things you know nothing about otherwise, it's going to expose you pretty quickly. So we're big on investing in these tools. We're constantly tinkering with them. I would say on the production side is where we've gotten maybe the most, I don't want to say value, but I would say where like the magic's really happening. We did this not photo shoot. We did a video spot for an organization here. It's a school that's close to my heart, and it's kind of a pro bono thing. And we sent the production team out to go, like, part of the idea was centered around getting kids to draw like scenes of the video, right? And so they were like sketching them like the way like 5, 6, 7-year-olds do. And the team got back and they were producing the video, and they realized they'd missed some scenes that they wanted, or at least new opportunities had to reveal themselves for additional scenes. And so they started on the path, as they would, to schedule time to go back to the school, and can we get into a classroom, can we do the thing? And somebody on the team said, wait, I think we can build an app within whatever video tool they were using at the time, train it on all of these drawings we've already gotten, and then we can prompt it to then create the scenes that we want to include that we don't have. And they just built it like in an afternoon, and we were able to like just create all of that work we couldn't have done before. But that was because I think we've embraced this culture of, we want to tinker, we want to play. You getting good at it, Dylan, does not mean now you don't have a job tomorrow, because now I realize somebody else can do this thing, or we can automate this stuff away. Like, cool, you've built this skill in Chat GPT, or we've built this app that allows us to do this thing. Like, now you can go on and do other things that are maybe higher value outputs of your job. So yes, I could probably go on quite a bit about this in terms of how we think about it, but I'll stop there in case you have anything in particular.
I love it. I love the production example. I think the idea now is just like, don't get blocked by the traditional blockers. Like, oh crap, we didn't get a scene, or we missed a line. The actor didn't say this thing. We need to pay him money to come back into a booth and say these things.
Yes.
We don't have enough. We don't have enough money to do the explosion scene. It's like really just kind of more like the foundational things of like, okay, well, the constraints of the traditional production process are less pronounced. The walls are thinner. You can break through the walls more often. Challenger brands can punch above their weight class from a production perspective. And
that's right.
I'm all there for it. I'll admit that, when I first started the podcast, I used to have to do like 4 hours of research on every single guest. I would watch every video that they'd ever appeared in. I'd listen to every podcast. I'd read every article. And, there's a certain advantage to that, because especially hearing and looking at them, you build artificial chemistry. So I'm kind of like, I feel like I know you before I know you, which is kind of a cool, way to trick your brain. And then, there's a difference between what AI is thinks important and what I, as Dylan Conroy, might think important, because I might key in on a certain element of your life personally, maybe outside of professional, that I am more interested in than the AI thinks I am. But what I found is over time, AI has figured out those things about me, and they know, like, oh, if this guy cares about surfing, make sure to ask a surfing question.
Yeah.
The AIs figure those things out over time as they have a feedback loop with my 300 episodes and coming back to me with research. It knows the types of things I like to talk about.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I mean, I think that's it, right? Like maybe a parallel example we had recently. We were working with a client in the energy space, and a year ago they wanted us to do, anybody who's worked in a creative team at an agency knows this assignment all too well, like here's the media plan, we need to punch out creative for these 300 different assets, and no creative wants to do that work. It's tedious, it's mind-numbing, it's necessary, but we did it for them a year ago, and it takes time, so you can charge a pretty good fee for some of that stuff, right? And then they came back to us this year, and it was essentially the same ask, and they said we need to go through this process again, and the team just kind of, as they did, sent an estimate, here, we can do it, and the client rightfully pushed back. She said, isn't there something with AI that can help make this faster, speed this process along? And sure, and they were absolutely right, there was. And now if you're a junior creative, or you're like a production designer, you might look at that and say, well, shoot, AI is taking big chunks of my time, but or of my job description. But there are a couple truths in there. Number one, you didn't like doing that work anyway. That wasn't the thing that you enjoyed. But number two, now we can automate that stuff through a lot faster, and you can spend your time focusing on the bigger picture ideas. What are the higher level thinking we can bring to our clients? What's the bigger picture campaign ideas you can be putting your time and effort into? So I think, yeah, if you put your head in the sand, the world's gonna, as with any innovation, it's gonna leave you in the past, right? AI is no different. I think the interesting thing about AI, and we had a recent conversation internally about this, which is so often it's machine learning repackaged as something new now, right? But so many of these things, like on the media side, for example, like these platforms worked with what we now call AI. We used to call it machine learning. It was doing the same thing.
Yeah, totally. Machine learning is what, IBM branded Watson 12 years ago.
Right. Yeah, I almost forgot about Watson.
Yeah, well, the only reason it's different is because it's in the hand of the consumer now, right? Like if it
right.
wasn't in everybody's pocket, it would still just be machine learning.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, you're right.
All right. You've led agency teams supporting presidential campaigns. I know politics can be polarizing, so I won't ask you to say what campaign you worked on unless you feel comfortable talking about it. But that must have been quite an experience. I've had an experience opening up the Washington, D.C. office of a prior agency. And, the way that we approached it, even though we had political sensibilities as an agency, we decided to work on what we call the public education money. So it was the money from the PACs. It was the money from the lobbyists. It was basically all the money outside of the campaign dollars, which is still a lot of money. So just kind of curious if you kind of walk me. One of the things that I thought was fascinating about standing up that office was when we got into like personal identifiable data or any of like the rules and regulations around like, any kind of compliance, basically everything went out the window. If you were able to do it, you could do it. So just be curious about, your time in supporting a political campaign as big as a presidential race, and what'd you learn? And was that an exciting opportunity?
Yes, it was an exciting opportunity, but I'm a political nerd at heart. I grew up in a very politically charged home, and I think that's always stuck with me. I'm kind of a nerd for history generally, and so I just find politics. I could probably argue any side of the aisle, to be clear. I have convictions, but I say that only to the point that like I find it fascinating and I find the debate to be interesting, and so I'm kind of a nerd for all of it. So yes, being able to kind of work up close and personal in that environment was interesting. Obviously, I was doing it from the lens of like marketing and advertising related, like the digital strategy and how do we drive fundraising online and all of that kind of stuff. But you think agencies like to talk that they move so quick. What moves faster than an agency is a presidential campaign. And like, and then there were weird things. I remember, I won't get into who it was. It's probably safer, it's best that I don't, but we had an office in Atlanta, and I was working out of that office actually. And at one point we like showed up to work one day and they're like, no, we had to evacuate the office. We're very convinced it's been bugged by one of the competing campaigns, and we've got to move. And we were just moved into like an underground situation, like very ad hoc, very just like middle of the day. And so like not only is the work just moves, but like the dynamics of a political campaign just like come from directions that you don't even anticipate sometimes, you know?
Oh yeah,
So I think
it's wild.
It is wild. It was a fun time. We set some records for fundraising and things like that, which was kind of a fun thing to have done. And the work was interesting. I don't know that presidential campaigns, for example, are ever like the standard of like what great creative looks like. In fact, I would argue that the reverse is often true. But you've gotta it's outcomes, not outputs, right? And I think that in that environment, it's that at like 100th degree.
Yeah, it's wild. I got a little taste of it. I did a little side hustle project for a policy institute. It was actually yesterday, in fact. And I forgot the urgency that you talk about. Like I got the campaign approval at 2:15 in the morning.
Sounds
Then
right.
I got a follow-up email at 8:15 in the morning, and then a text message by 9:15. And I was like, okay, I barely had my first cup of coffee. What's on here? And I was kind of like thrown back into the midst of it. I'm like, yep, you got to and this is after we delayed the campaign for 2.5 weeks, mind you. So
there you go. Yeah.
it's like delay and then you're on, right? So,
yeah.
Fun,
it's an interesting world. It's its own thing entirely.
Oh yeah, big time. All right. You've recently joked a little bit about the Falcon Saints rivalry and the passive aggressive flex of the scoreboard. How much of a brand's personality should be built around being a rival to its competitors, being an underdog, and punching up?
Oh, I think that's so situational.
Yeah.
I know what you're referring to. I joked about that on a podcast recently. It's a funny thing about the Falcons Saints rivalry. There's that we never display the Saints name anywhere inside Mercedes-Benz. It's just visitors, and it's the only team we troll that way. It's so anyway. To the question, I'm a big. I would say early days ammunition and even predating ammunition, I always kind of had this chip on my shoulder mentality. In fact, at one point you could walk into the ammunition office and we had like this big thing, that like a Detroit versus everybody thing. And then everybody kind of ripped that off. We did like ammunition versus everybody. We had t-shirts. We had it like spray painted on the wall in the office. And like, I'll never forget, like I woke up one day and I was just like that's not the voice of a leader. Do you know what I mean? And I think it's that old adage of like you denigrate your competition, you denigrate a whole category. And I think we had the opportunity, for example, to sponsor Brand Week. It was here in Atlanta. We were the big presenting sponsor of the whole thing.
Yeah. I remember you guys got it this week. That's cool.
Yeah, it was very cool. And I'll never forget, we had all of these placements where we could run videos or do, posters or big, displays inside the venue. And, we were meeting to kind of like, how do we want to use this? And we made a very intentional decision to say, we want everything we do to not be salesy. We're not here necessarily to pick up clients, though, of course, the exposure, that's part of the long-term bet, right? I'm not trying to sound like I'm being dishonest intellectually about that, but it was really about what is true is this is a bunch of marketers, brand and agency side, who are getting together for a week in Atlanta to just learn our craft, to talk about what we do, to learn from each other. And so we wanted to position ammunition very much like that in the room, where we are here just to help cultivate a conversation. We're here as a leader in the category. And so we actually never sold. There was no big CTA on anything that we did. There was no, we're better than everybody else for these reasons. There was none of that. We just existed in the same space. And so I think to the question, I think sports is obviously different. It's inherent to sports rivalries, right? Like I think certainly there are categories where you can get away with that kind of stuff. But I'm a big proponent of, if you want to be a leader, you got to act like a leader. And I often find that that's the best way to behave as a brand as well. Is you're here to lift everybody up. There's plenty of opportunity to go around for everybody, and kind of trying to stay in that lane. So I don't know if that's the answer you were hoping for to that question, but I think for the brands we serve and for the way ammunition conducts itself, that tends to be our posture.
Yeah, I think it's present. There's occasionally good work that you see in like the cell phone category. I thought it was hilarious when Verizon stole
or fast food on Twitter, right?
Fast food, fast food, especially with like the social beefs and whatnot.
Yeah.
And I think there are certain categories where you can kind of get away with it because like we're not curing cancer, or like
yes,
it's switching cell phones, it's deciding to buy a burrito instead of a hamburger one day,
yeah,
or chicken versus cows. I think like obviously in your hometown of Atlanta, there's a brand that's built an entire ethos around really more thinking of people to try and think of the category or the protein at least versus the competition. And obviously they've done a tremendous job in doing so. But I think there's something that like some of the best brands are the ones that don't even acknowledge their competitors. Like I remember interviewing an exec that spent 18 years at Nike, and he said, we didn't even think about our competitors. We thought of like, other innovators like in technology, and how are we trying to be, or we're thinking of like mind share in somebody's day. Like we're thinking, if you're only spending an hour on the basketball court, how can we get you to spend 2 hours on the basketball court and spend an extra hour on the basketball court instead of in the office or at home sleeping or whatever. It was like mind share was the focus for them, not market share, mind share. So I like that thinking. And I think it does, if you're obsessed with your competitors, you're looking this way, you're not looking that way.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah.
No, I couldn't agree more.
All right. You've written a lot about how empathy affects leadership. We've talked a little bit about it today. How do you measure if a campaign can be empathetic towards their audience?
How a campaign can be empathetic towards its audience? Well, I mean, I think it starts with whether or not you've identified the human truth that message is going to be about, right? Like I think I think great campaigns, great creative is always focused on some human truth that is real, right? And I think we work with brands that I think sometimes, we can hear other people look at and say, these are categories that can be overlooked, or, you can't do great creative in that space. And I think what we have found is the reverse to be true, which is behind every buying decision, especially on the B2B side, like there's this misnomer that like B2B is just like, it's a business talking to a business, and like, that's objectively not true. Right, like I still got to sell Dylan as to why Dylan on behalf of
people buy from
company.
People, not companies, right? Yep.
Right, and so I think we've made up this world where like I have to think so differently if I'm a B2B organization, and we don't subscribe to that. Like we've always felt, and not to say we're a B2B agency, we're not. We already talked about the B2B to C layers of how we go to market, but it's what is true is the human truth is always the necessary part of great creative. Like understanding the emotion behind why somebody feels the way that they do or they don't is so critical to getting to good creative. Whenever we work with anybody, one of the things we want to talk about is like, what do you wish was true? Right? Let's talk about that. In a perfect world, what's true? Okay, great. We write that on the board. And then on the other side, it's like, what's true today? And there's always then a conversation in the middle of like, why is this thing not happening? And you're over here, right? How do we drive that change in the market that gets people to do what it is you want them to do? Is it they don't trust you? They don't think you have the products. Your products are inferior to your competitions. Your distribution network's not correct. Like whatever it is, great creative's great creative, or we can build slick messaging programs or new websites or whatever it is. But if they don't believe it, they're not going to do it, right? Or if they can't buy it, they're not going to buy it, right? Like it's just some of those things. And so really understanding that, but it always comes down to what's the emotional insight that's actually going to lead to the creative. And so is that a direct answer to the empathy? I don't know, but I think is what's true in that to build empathetic creative, the empathy comes by understanding who and what Dylan needs, wants, what's keeping him up at night, and then ensuring that I put messaging in front of him that ensures that we position the brand as one who understands you. We get the decision you have to make, and we're equipped to help you make that with a high degree of confidence that you're making the right one by the time that transaction completes. I think that's how we tend to think about that.
I used to represent a creator who's based in Atlanta. Actually, his name is Trip Crosby, and he was behind the conference call and real life videos. And he's starred in about $1 billion worth of IPO exits as the face of and the humorous writer of these really funny kind of B2B early campaigns for these companies. And his insight was always like, make the ICP the hero of the spot and make it funny and make it relatable and make it deal with the pain points that they deal with every single day when they're not acknowledged for the things that they do, such as IT professionals or, service implementers inside of like Oracle or whatever the ICP is. Like there are these people who feel like they don't get enough recognition. And if you could make them the hero, they will love you for it. And that will create real word of mouth, virality, etc. So I think that's a great insight.
I could not agree more. Yes.
Awesome, man. Well, hey, Jeremy, it's been a pleasure. Really excited to get to know you a little bit. I am sad to say that I used to spend lots of time in Atlanta, but since COVID, I haven't been back. But I'm hoping to be able to get out to your market at some point again, and maybe we can grab lunch or coffee at that particular time. But with that being said, if folks want to follow along with your thinking or stay in touch and or learn more about the agency, if they have resonated with some of the themes of what we talked about today, where would you like to send the audience?
Yeah, go to ammunition.agency. All our social links are down in the footer. We post a bunch of our kind of we say don't call it a podcast. We produce some videos to kind of get our opinions out into the world as well. You can find all that there. Certainly we're on Instagram, we're on LinkedIn, but would love to stay in touch and provide value wherever we can.
Let's do it. And for those of you who are watching at home, don't forget to give us a follow or a subscribe if this is the first time you're seeing the show. A honest review on whatever podcast platform you might be listening to the show would be how we find a more organic audience. And last but not least, if there is a B2B2C marketer, somebody in the services space who wants to punch above their weight class, get serious about creating great work for their brand, maybe an independent agency owner who wants to think about positioning and how they should be going to market and how they should be skipping rungs in the ladder as ammunition has grown and expanded their offering to more and more categories. Don't forget to share the show. And with that, Jeremy, I will wish you a happy afternoon. Enjoy the rest of your day and look forward